Hi everyone, and welcome to our January meeting of the Restoring Neighborhoods Task Force. Happy New Year. We hope your 2017 is off to a good start, and thanks for joining us as part of that start. We are going to dive right into FHFA's presentation on life after HAMP, but before we do that, I want to run through introductions here in the room, and then a couple of brief policy updates. So this is Rebecca King with the National Housing Conference, joined by... This is Caitlin Snyder with the National Housing Conference.
Ethan Handelman, also with NHC.
So that's it for us here in the room. FHFA is joining us remotely, the blessings of technology. And as I mentioned, a couple of brief policy updates. Congress is back in session. They are not really tackling appropriations at the moment. I'm sure you're seeing a lot of media attention on budget resolutions. Just a reminder, that's not really addressing spending, especially not in detail at the HUD level, but we will keep you posted as they do.
Right, it's not the appropriations process.
Right.
The budget resolution sets a framework for appropriations and, more importantly, creates a path for the Budget Reconciliation Acts, which are a way to move bills more expeditiously through Congress.
So stay tuned. We'll see what Congress gets into. But we do have a couple of advocacy opportunities we wanted to make sure you were aware of. The Campaign for Housing and Community Development Funding is preparing a national report on the positive impacts created by HUD and USDA programs that they're going to send to members of Congress. So they want a wide range of success stories to show how low-income families have benefited in rural, suburban, and urban communities. State and local organizations, as well as individuals, are encouraged to submit success stories. I will send out the link in the follow-up email. The deadline is Friday, January 6th. So please think about stories you could submit so we can have a really robust report for that effort. And then another advocacy opportunity, the Non-Defense Discretionary United campaign is organizing a sign-on letter to Congress to protect non-defense discretionary programs like HUD programs from further cuts and to end sequestration. Because the temporary relief that we had from the Bipartisan Budget Act expires this year. So without action, we're going to face appropriations bills with really difficult spending caps. So we encourage national, state, and local organizations to sign the letter. That deadline is further out. It's January 27th, and I will send out that link as well. And then lastly, hopefully you saw that FHFA put out their duty to serve rules, which creates a process for the GSEs and also stakeholders to get involved in how GSEs meet their.
Keep going.
Sorry, I'm getting some internal discussion here in the room. Apologies for that. Anyway, we're going to discuss that at the end after we have our presentation on life after HAMP. So we'll get into the weeds on that a little bit more. So stay tuned for that. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Danielle and Luis with FHFA to talk us through life after HAMP.
Thanks, Rebecca. I'm going to just go ahead and get these slides going and then take it right over to Luis.
Okay, thanks everybody for having us. I'm going to talk about life after HAMP, or the recently announced Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac new loan modification, the flex modification. So on our agenda is I'll give you some background on the process that we undertook to develop the flex modification. I'll describe the flex modification itself, and then give you describe a little bit of our interaction and collaboration with borrower advocates. So with the housing crisis abating throughout the country to a large degree, and with HAMP expiring at the end of last year, FHFA and the enterprises decided to go over lessons learned from the crisis era programs like HAMP and other modification programs to see how to make a better loan modification product for servicers and borrowers. So in case you're not familiar, the FHFA publishes a scorecard. We call it a scorecard for the enterprise's objectives and goals for the year. So in 2016, FHFA scorecard required enterprises to develop an aligned post-crisis load modification offering, which is the flex modification that was recently announced. The flex modification will replace, like I just said, HAMP, and it will replace the enterprise's proprietary standard and streamlined modifications. And I'll go into those a little bit more in a little bit. To be clear, standard and streamlined will continue to be offered until the flex modification is implemented, which will be in October 2017. The flex modification leverages lessons learned, like I mentioned, from the crisis era program. It's designed for a more stable housing environment that can, at the same time, respond to local downturns. It reflects loss mitigation principles that supports home retention by simplifying the borrower experience and implementation by servicers. And it's responsive to feedback from stakeholders, including servicers, trade organizations, borrower advocacy groups, and federal agencies, including Treasury, CFPB, and the variety of housing agencies, in particular HUD. So I just talked about lessons learned and our being responsive to constituent feedback. We also had some high-level guiding principles that guided the enterprises and FHFA's work in developing the flex modification. So at the end of July, FHFA with Treasury and HUD published a joint white paper on the guiding principles of the future of loss mitigation. And those principles were affordability, so meaningful payment relief, sustainability, so that means the long-term affordable payment, accessibility in terms of a simple process for homeowners, transparency, and accountability. So the enterprises focus on the first three. And I'll just also note that CFPB also published its own guiding principles that largely mirror these principles. But so we have lessons learned and guiding principles in terms of developing the flex modification. With this next slide, I want to convey that this was not just a quick process that would involve, for example, a couple of meetings. It was a very robust stakeholder outreach process that covered very many meetings, and the enterprises worked really hard to build actually a consensus. So not just taking some feedback, but having some robust discussions with, so with us, FHFA, with servicers, advocacy groups, and trade associations. In particular for the trade associations, they discussed a lot with the MBA's Future Loss Mitigation Task Force, which some of you may know had published its own one mod white paper on the future of loss mitigation. And so for those who don't know, MBA, the Mortgage Bankers Association. So on our next slide, I want to go over a timeline of this robust stakeholder outreach process. So like I mentioned, it was not something quick or glib. It was a whole year's process from that started in February with the Future of Loss Mitigation Symposium hosted here at FHFA and ended in mid-December with the announcement of the modifications by Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac. These were a lot of meetings. Some of them were specifically with servicers, some of them were specifically with advocates. We tried to, and we could, hold everybody in the same meeting. We had some meetings that included CFPB and Treasury and the housing agencies. We have a regular process where we interact with the federal housing agencies, where we kept them abreast as well. And like I mentioned, these stakeholder outreach meetings included servicers, trade associations, advocacy organizations, federal housing and regulatory agencies. And we also, FHFA and the enterprises also met with technology vendors and mortgage insurers, sometimes here at FHFA or also at larger conferences like MBA Annual, to make sure we're checking in with everybody who's involved in the operations or implementation of these loan modification programs. So the discussions focused on lessons learned, on anything stakeholders wanted to make sure we were aware of to try to fix. So servicer effectiveness, borrower experience with the application and documentation that goes along with that, the modification itself, the role of housing counseling, and the impact of regulatory and compliance landscape. So it was an 11-month process that not only talked about the mechanics of the loan modification product itself, but we tried to do a holistic review of the whole loss mitigation process. And I'll talk a lot about some of those other aspects in a little bit. So now I'm going to talk about the flex modification itself. I'll give you a little bit of background on standard modification, which is the main product that Fannie and Freddie use. But to set you up, flex modification builds off of the enterprise's existing modification product standard. So on this page I have on the top half is the different steps in standard and streamlined, or what we call the waterfall. And streamlined is essentially the same steps as standard modification, except it's for borrowers that are over 90 days delinquent, and that modification doesn't require any documentation. But think of them as the same product, the same resulting product. So the first step in the standard modification is borrowers get their arrearages capitalized into the loan. So that would be like any missed payments gets added to the loan. The next step is the interest rate on their loan is reduced to the current rate for those borrowers with loans with mark-to-market loan-to-values that are at or above 80%. Their loan terms are extended up to 40 years, to 40 years from the date of the modification of the loan, and their loans are principal is forborne down to 115% mark-to-market loan-to-value, and there is a cap there though up to 30% of the post-modification UPB. So that's the standard modification product. As of today, you go through all those steps, and whatever payment you have at the end is the payment you're going to get. Flex modification builds off that with a few main differences. It'll forbear down to 100% instead of 115% mark-to-market LTV with that same cap. And it'll also introduce a target for a 20% payment reduction and a 40% housing to income ratio for the borrower. Housing to income ratio is considered an affordability metric, and that's, as you see below, at the bottom of the slide, it's monthly housing expense over monthly gross income. Whereas standard, like I said, goes through the steps, and that's the payment you get. With the flex modification, because of these targets, you go through the steps of flex modification, and then if you don't meet these targets, the enterprise would be able to forbear even more, down to all the way to 80% to try to make those targets. And for flex modification, there is a streamlined version, like for standard, for borrowers over 90 days delinquent. But those borrowers only get a 20% payment reduction, not that 40% housing to income ratio target, because there wouldn't be documentation to support that calculation. And overall, in comparing standard modification to flex modification, what would the results be, or what do we expect the results to be? We expect the number of eligible borrowers to be increased, and the flex modification to provide greater payment relief to borrowers. So two things that we found to be very important, along with other considerations about implementation. So I think we're going to meet our two main goals. Now I'm going to talk a little bit about the collaboration and feedback we got from borrower advocates. Though stakeholders, including advocates, were pleased with the modification results. In particular, as I mentioned, we're going to increase eligibility and increase payment relief. They had some additional feedback for us, for things to look at as we go along in 2017. So the first thing they'd like us to look at is making sure this will be an iterative process. so that we announced flex modification in December, and it will be implemented in October, but that's not the end all for the modification. We're going to keep looking at it with the enterprises and see if there's any tweaks that we need to make, or if there's any structural changes that need to be made because of market changes. We're also going to look at borrower documentation to try to streamline the amount of documentation and make sure it's easier for borrowers to apply for the modification. And lastly, borrower advocates asked us to identify where counselors can engage more meaningfully in the loan modification exception process. So the exception process is, for example, if a borrower does not qualify for a loan modification through the normal process, a servicer could ask one of the GSCs for an exception to get a loan modification. So we want to see how counselors can be more explicitly involved in that process. Lastly, we're going to be working on several things in 2017, like I mentioned, partly based on borrower advocate feedback, also feedback from servicers. The first item and largest item, or first item on our to-do list is streamlining the Uniform Borrower Assistance Form, which is the application borrowers must submit in order to get a loan modification. We're going to try to make that shorter, easier to read, easier to understand. We understand that many people don't qualify, end up not qualifying for the loan modification, not because of some sort of metric or the loan situation, it's just they don't submit their application fully. We're also going to look at borrower documentation that's tied to the application. We're going to look at the role of counseling, and we're going to look at foreclosure prevention, other foreclosure prevention alternatives like repayment plans, forbearance plans, short sales, and deeds in lieu. That's our presentation. We would be happy to take questions if you have any for us.
Thank you so much, Luis. And folks, feel free to send questions to the question box that you have for Luis. And while you are thinking about that, Luis, could you go back, review for me just really quickly, since I'm not that familiar. When you say that the Streamlined mod has no documentation, is that literally no like what does that mean exactly?
Yeah, that literally means the borrower does not have to submit any supporting documentation. Yeah, and the loan modification will, for example, the borrower will need to, for example, do some trial payments. So there is a process for the borrower to actually like accept the loan modification. By no documents, I mean like no W-2s or pay stubs or any other sort of documentation like that.
So this is Prasant Sar, and I manage servicing policy here at FHFA and work with Luis. So Streamline is as Luis mentioned, the post-90 solution for borrowers who have not responded to the initial solicitations for mortgage payment assistance. So they've been solicited, a borrower has yet to respond, and then at 90 days delinquent, they are sent what's called the Streamlined Modification. And in the Streamlined Modification, it basically says, here's your new payment, and you need to make 3 payments. And at the culmination of those 3 payments, we will send you something called a loan modification agreement. And upon signing that document, your loan will be permanently modified to this new payment structure. And then you would just sign that document, send it in, and continue to make payments, and then that's your payment for the life of the loan.
Okay, great. Thank you. We have a question. Do you see the question I was about to mention?
Okay, this is Danielle again. I'm just going to read the question for Luis and Prasant to answer. First question we got is, I didn't see the extra forbearance down to 80% for those who don't meet the payment reduction for DTI goals. that still in this?
Yeah. Hi, Julia. Yes, that is still part of the modification. It's not explicit on the slide. I mentioned it when I was talking, but yes, that is part of the modification. So just to recap, if we have these targets of a 20% payment reduction and a 40% housing to income ratio, if you're below 90 days delinquent, the enterprises and the servicer will target those two metrics. And if you go through the waterfall flex modification, don't meet those, the enterprise will forbear you down even further, all the way down to 80% to try to make those targets.
And if you're in the post-90 space, so that means you're past 90 days past due, and you are sent that streamlined modification, that one automatically goes to 80% LTV, the loan to value, because there is no documentation to utilize to determine whether the 20% target has been met with the 40% HDI ratio. So therefore, the enterprises or the servicers will do the full calculation. They will forbear down to 80%, and what you see in the mail as a borrower is the payment that reflects that modification. So you're getting the full scope or the entirety of the modification at its most generous levels.
So next question we have, and I'll summarize, are there any other work streams or continuing activities for the subgroup who this mod won't qualify for this mod, especially seniors with equity?
So this is Prasad Sar again. So the list that you have on the next step slide, those aren't, I wouldn't call them, these are areas that we're looking at. They're not all broken out into different work groups, a large body of work, of course. But to the question about seniors with equity, that is one of the issues that has been raised by the borrower advocacy groups and how those borrowers will be assisted. And in our conversations with the advocacy groups, we did recognize that there could potentially be challenges with that. The enterprises have a very robust exceptions process that they built into their regular processes for evaluating individuals in particular situations, and seniors would fall into that. Seniors with equity would fall squarely within that box. So as those situations arise, servicers are able to submit these particular cases to Fannie and Freddie for review. In addition, counselors can also ask for escalation of these cases, as can borrowers. And Fannie and Freddie have a very, there's a systematic process built around that currently.
Thanks for that. That's very helpful.
Hey, it's Ethan here at NHC. I'm wondering if one of you could talk about how the servicers have started planning for implementation of this. I mean, if there's one thing we all learned from the crisis, it's the importance of coordinated and organized servicing, and that's still a work in progress in a lot of places. But what sort of reception have you gotten, and what sort of preparations are underway?
So this particular modification, as you can see, and I can't remember exactly which slide it was on, is essentially built on the backs of Standard and Streamline, which were the enterprises and are the enterprise's proprietary loan modification products right now. So this, because it's making changes to their systems, but it's not making wholesale changes to their system. We anticipate in our conversations with the enterprises that this will be a late third quarter, early fourth quarter implementation schedule, which we think is pretty good. Usually when we've rolled out modifications, especially during the crisis. It took longer, and in some cases, and certainly the servicers did not have as much like lead time in order to implement, which obviously creates a lot of risk, and even as you said, it can be problematic. So the reception's been positive in that we're not totally unraveling the current system, but it's still going to take time because of not only the systematic changes, but also documentation that is complementary to those system changes. So the solicitation letters, other types of documents that have to go out acknowledging receipt of borrower documentation, that type of thing. Still, we've heard, as Luis mentioned earlier, that October 2017 is realistic, for the implementation of this product, and we anticipate we're not going to have any challenges in meeting that goal, nor will the servicers.
Good to hear. Good to hear.
I see another question that's just popped in. Let's see if we can.
Danielle, are you seeing that one too?
Yes, I'll go ahead and read that out. My organization participates in HUD's distressed asset sales program and is currently required to provide HAMP modifications as an option if homeowners are eligible. Once the new flex modification options are rolled out, will organizations like ours be required to offer the flex modification?
So the flex modification, but it's the enterprise's modification. It is not, it's related to the loans that are owned, guaranteed, or securitized by the enterprises. So it's not applied. It's not required to be applied elsewhere. We hope that the industry is looking closely at the progress that we've made in terms of making innovative changes to the existing modification structure, but it only applies to loans owned, guaranteed, or securitized by the enterprise.
And just for clarity, I know most of us know when you say the enterprises, you mean Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, but
yeah, sorry about that. For Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac.
We're saying it because the distressed asset sales program is for FHA loans. So this is separate from FHA and also separate from loans that are held privately or securitized privately outside of Fannie or Freddie.
Right, right. And then, of course, you have loans that are already in standard modifications and streamlined modifications, and people are paying and whatnot. That's not the target population.
Gotcha.
Okay. Do you have a sense right now, and this is probably an unfair question, I realize as I'm asking it, of how many folks might be eligible come October, or like if you did it today, how many loans we're talking about?
I don't think we've run that analysis, or I haven't seen, the analysis may have been run, but I haven't seen it. I will tell you that in comparison to standard and streamline, the eligibility improves, overall eligibility improves by about 10%. So it would be 10% more people eligible for flex mod that were not eligible under standard.
Great.
Okay, well, I'm not seeing other questions come in, and I do want to touch on duty to serve like we mentioned. So I'm going to turn it over, well, before I turn it over to Ethan for a quick summary, I want to thank all of our FHFA speakers for helping us out today and exploring life after HAMP. So thank you for your time and this information, but don't go anywhere as we talk about duty to serve really quickly.
I was going to say, they're not off the hook yet, Rebecca.
I know.
And for folks who are interested, we're going to send around the slides and a link to a way to find more information on the coming new modification programs from FHFA. And then we'll leave it to Danielle's discretion whose contact info we include with that, but you'll have someone to reach out to. But yeah, let me change gears a little bit and talk about duty to serve, because that came out in the middle of last month. It's a final rule, and I will do probably some disservice to it in giving a quick summary, and then we'll talk a little bit about how you can get involved in the process going forward. What the final rule does is it creates a process to implement the 2008 duty to serve obligation created in the Housing and Economic Recovery Act, the HERA Act, back in 2008. What this does is it creates a reason for Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac to try and reach underserved markets better. The three underserved markets identified in the statute are manufactured housing, rural housing, and preservation of affordable housing. So those are the sort of the three big areas. And there are all sorts of different activities that Fannie and Freddie can do to try and reach those. It can be loan purchases, it can be new loan product development, it can be investment in R&D activity, it can be greater outreach. All of those options come about through what are called underserved market plans. Each enterprise has to create one under guidance forthcoming soon from FHFA. Their plans are reviewed by FHFA, they're released for public input, and then they're put into effect. And each plan runs for 3 years. During that 3-year period, they get periodic scoring and evaluation by FHFA, and then at the end of 3 years, they get a grade. I think they also get grades, through those periodic evaluations. And then the process starts again. The idea is that it's iterative. So each time a plan comes out, they do a bunch of activities, see what results they achieved, how well they expanded access and reached underserved markets, and then they either build on what they've done or try new stuff if the stuff they've done didn't work. It's a pretty innovative process. It's one that really builds on a lot of good input that FHFA and the enterprises got during 2 rounds of public comment, once back in 2010 and then more recently with this final rule, and we're pretty optimistic for it. Part of the reason I wanted to bring it up here is because there's an opportunity right now for folks to get involved and really help the process succeed and help Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac better reach these underserved market areas in all sorts of ways. Right now, FHFA is embarking on a series of listening sessions that I'm hoping Danielle can tell you all more about. The reason I want you to hear it is because this is a great time to tell FHFA and tell Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac, more importantly, what to put in their plans, what great ideas you have, what you've heard they might be thinking about that you really want them to do, because it's the best time to put innovative ideas out there. As the process moves forward, there will be other opportunities for public input, but getting in early with detailed thoughts is very positive. So let me stop talking. I'll turn it over to Danielle and let her share info about these listening sessions.
Sure, thanks, Ethan. And I think your summary was actually pretty well, covered everything. And if anybody wants more detail on the actual rule or the next step, we have all the information on our website. We created a page. It's fhfa.gov/DTS. You can find out all about the final rule, the timeline, evaluation guidance. We also did a webinar last month. It was about an hour with a presentation and Q&A if you want to have some time to kind of go through that and get a little bit more of a deeper dive into the actual rule. So about the listening sessions that Ethan mentioned, we have registration open for those now, and that is also on our website, fhfa.gov/DTS. We have 3 in-person sessions and 1 virtual. The first session will be held on January 25th in Chicago. The next one will be on February 1st in San Francisco. And then we'll have our last in-person session on February 8th in Washington, D.C. And the following day we'll do a virtual session where people can sort of call in webinar style with their feedback. We're asking for people to come prepared with about 5-minute presentations on, just as Ethan said, what you would like the enterprises to consider including in their underserved market plans. And we'll be scheduling those based on the registration starting late next week. So if you're interested in participating, please get your registration in. That closes on January 11th. And if you have any other questions about that, please go to the website, send us an email, and Ethan, you can always give out my information. If people have specific questions, they can contact me anytime. It's just danielle.walton@fhsa.gov.
We will certainly do that. Thank you, Danielle. And the other free advice I give to people is take advantage of the resources on the FHFA website on this, and do a little homework, because the final rule does a good job of characterizing what sorts of activities could fit into duty to serve, and there's a lot of opportunities in there, but there are some things that wouldn't fit, and it's worth making sure that whatever you're proposing is something that actually does fit in. So, for instance, one thing that jumped out to me under the kind of investments section, FHFA makes it quite clear that Fannie Mae and Freddie Mac won't be making grants right now while they're in conservatorship. So, all of us would love for there to be a new grant program for affordable housing or housing counseling or any of the economic renewal activities that are connected to housing that we all care about and support. But going in with that, it'll be a non-starter. I would say think creatively about other ways that the enterprises can use their lending programs, their outreach programs, their R&D capacity to support this work, because there's opportunities for all of that. And I wouldn't want us, any of us, to be sort of stymied by going in asking for one thing and only then realizing that, yeah, that won't work.
Thanks, that's a really good point. And also just want to remind everybody, if you're not able to make it to one of the in-person sessions, we hope you are. It's a really good opportunity to kind of be face-to-face with us and the enterprises on these issues. But we are, as always, accepting written comments. If you want to send an email, a letter, all that information is on our website, and we are more than welcome those as well.
And Danielle, will the folks at Fannie and Freddie who are, charged with drafting these plans be listening at the listening sessions and getting those written comments too?
Yes, they will be there in person for the sessions, and then we'll also be making sure that we have that transcribed for the people that weren't able to attend from the enterprises, but they definitely are there to listen, and they are very welcoming of the feedback.
Excellent. Excellent.
Great. Well, thank you for that information about the listening sessions, and we will send that out to the whole task force, the links, to make it easy for you to find if you are able to attend and need to register. So look for that in the follow-up email.
And I'll be at the DC one, so come say hi if you see me there.
I'll look forward to seeing you there.
Cool.
All right, well, not seeing any other questions coming in from folks, I just want to thank FHSA again for joining us today and for all of our attendees, and we will reconvene February 1st. So that should be on your calendar, but look for more information to come. And with that, I will give you back
a little bit extra time of your day.
Afternoon.
Nice. Thank you all for joining us.
Thank you.